Hello, my name is Micael Sousa, and I'm doing here a presentation about the use of analog games as tools, as we say in planning, as planning support tools to plan cities. And before I start the presentation, that is a sequence of case studies, I think I should do a brief introduction of myself, a personal introduction. And I will not be very long in this personal presentation. Let me say that just now I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the School of Architecture, Planning and Environmental Policy of the University College Dublin, where I work with a group where we are developing game-based approaches, analog and digital. And we started by using, for example, as an example, Minecraft environments, changing them and creating new solutions, departing on that platform and then other platforms to use this as tools for planning for children, for teachers, for local authorities, and using this also in an educational perspective to address climate change. So this is one of my works at the moment, my activities. The other activity is for something based in the US, which is CAPTURES, which is the Center for Advanced Preparedness and Threat Response Simulation, where I work as a game designer, and I'm working on some games by myself and helping the team to develop other games to deal with this notion of preparedness for future threats, where there's some of the projects are related to pandemics and to response for bigger threats. And now I'm also working there to the emergency management approach, where we are trying to develop serious games to deal with this. But I will talk about these two activities in the presentation and many others that I do as a freelancer, and also as consulting activities for the use of games for this type of serious uses, that most of them are related to spatial planning exercises, because my PhD is about spatial planning, and my tool or my tools were several of my tools were games. So the use of games to create these spatial planning approaches, where the collaborative dimension and the collaborative approach was one of the core approaches to do this. So I will talk about several of these cases. Usually when I share this, I receive the questions during the presentation. In this case, we are doing this in the end of the presentation. And I want to apologize because, as you've noticed, I'm not a native English speaker, but I'll try my best. And I'm based in Portugal, which is a fine country, and I hope that you can visit us someday, because we always like to welcome people. And let's do now the presentation. I will show the structure of the presentation. And first of all, I'll address what is a game, because usually we should define this. I believe we should define this when we do a presentation like this, because there might be some newcomers that are not very familiar with these terms. Then the public participation challenges, because we are dealing here with serious games, and one of the goals of these games, especially these games to plan cities in a collaborative way, is to deal with public participation. And also games as tools for planning, this in a more broader and general approach to games and planning. And then several case studies where I've used these games as collaborative planning support tools, and I will talk about them. And of course, the conclusions and limitations, because although this is a very, there's a lot of potential of using these games as tools, there's of course limitations that we should be aware when we decide to use them. So what's a game? I like this definition from Boller and Kapp because it's very complete. So we they say that the game is an activity with a goal, a challenge, or several challenges with rules that guide to the achievement. Or we can say there's a goal, and the goal is defined by these rules that define our system. And it is this approach of games as systems that allow us to create models and then make our games relate to these models. And then we have serious approaches to the use of games, and we can collect that and make decisions and analyze what the game is, if the game is achieving what it's supposed to achieve, because we are dealing here with serious games that needs to have a purpose beyond mere entertainment. So also here the dimension of the interactivity, that the players have agency, so they make decisions in this game environment that usually is the replication of a model of at least a part of a reality. And one of the most impactful and the most important things of games is this feedback, because the game provides feedback to the players. So they make decisions, and then they see the impacts of the decisions, and this is quite powerful as a teaching tool, as a tool to highlight the impacts of the decisions. And of course, if games are these models, and some of these models are mathematical models, we can have quantifiable outcomes. Can have win, lose conditions, and a lot of other ways to evaluate the game progress and the game outcomes and the game goals. And usually this approach of using games, it's impactful in the players because it generates emotional reactions. So we are creating these interactive models with rules, with feedback systems, progression, it depends on the game, with outcomes, but what we want is emotional reaction from the players for the games to deliver all their potential. And all these games, they are agency-based and interactive systems, because there are some games where the users or the players don't have a lot of agency. So sometimes they do not decide what happened in the game. And the games that I will talk about are always games where the participants, the players, impact and make decisions and can see it evolving and being explored in that system that is the game. So, and because these interactive systems deliver experiences, they usually are engaging. So this is something we wish for the games to be. We wish them to be engaging, so that people like to play them, feel that the game has a meaning, has a purpose. So it's serious in that sense that it has a meaning and a purpose, and it's impactful. So there's an advantage, and the player must feel that was useful and positive to play the game. And this connects to the game goals. So we want something that mimics a reality, help us to make decisions, to highlight solutions, and usually these are the game goals. But we want this to be engaging and be impactful for the players. And usually serious games, these games for goals, have to balance this, the simulation side, and this way of being engaging and meaningful and impactful that sometimes we see in the literature described as fun. But fun, it's very generic and subjective. Usually we try to divide this into things we can measure and evaluate. And of course, this could be more or less serious. But why do games matter? Usually when we try to defend the useful impact of games, we try to divide this in different topics that allow us to understand what's at stake here and what is the real potential of games. Usually when we create these games, because most of the times I'm talking about multiplayer games where a lot of users interact in the system. And in this case, the system must be safe. So usually games are safe spaces to play and interact and to explore several social dimensions. In this case of games for urban planning and city planning, we are dealing with social dimensions that can be complex, and it's very important that the game is a safe space to explore them. And then it's visual, it's tangible, and it's transparency. The game has transparency in a way that shows what were the decisions and what were the outcomes. And for this use of games for urban planning, it's very important to have visual tools and tangible tools, because sometimes we are dealing with issues that the users might not be expert in them, and having these visual tools to clarify what we are dealing with and what we are addressing, and even what the other players are doing in the game, it's very important. And in these cases, because these games have agency, so people can choose, the players can choose what to do, the games are sometimes defined and designed to allow the users to fail. So they learn and they think by doing, but also by failing. And this is also a very important part that is connected to the safe space, where we can use these games as ways to test the things that we want. And of course, the feedback and outcomes, the cause and effect, and the goal-driven progress, it's very important, and its applications to education, it's also very, very, very impactful and recognized in the literature. And the surprise and the novelty, this is important also when we want to bring people to a participatory system. There's usually some, imagine that we are creating games for local authorities, municipalities, cities. Sometimes they wish to increase the levels of participation, and the game can be a way to create this surprise and this novelty, and also a way to generate emergent outcomes that otherwise would be difficult to predict and to get. So games can do this. And we can, if we master game design elements, and if we are expert in designing games, we can create tailor-made simulations of reality, and we can balance the level of simulation with the level of playability, and managing what we wish with the game. So it can be more playable or more in the simulation side, and this is something we usually decide according to the game goals of applying that game. And of course, we should, in this case, when we are dealing with games for very varied publics, because we usually, in these cases of games for urban planning, we don't know exactly, especially when we are aiming for citizens, we don't know who will be the players. So we need to have games that take into consideration the different players' profiles. So some of the users or the players can be more engaged by the creativity side of games, some by the storytelling, some by the competition, some for the challenge of solving a problem. So this is something we should take into account when dealing with these games. And of course, we are dealing here with multiplayer games designed for purposes, but they are played by humans. And these games, and I will only talk about analog games, so tabletop and board games, they need to have a facilitation technique to conduct these group dynamics. And some of the times, and I will talk about some of these cases, the facilitator or the group of facilitators must be able to change the game if the game is not delivering what is supposed. And this is quite an issue, a difficult problem. And some games allow this and other games do not allow this modification while the game is ongoing. But this is something to take into account, that sometimes the facilitation side, the part of the data collection, the way the process is implemented is a very big part and important part of this. And if I have to make a summary, let's make a summary of this. When we are trying to do these games, we should have someone, for example, in a team that creates these games. Usually they are created in teams. Someone that is an expert on the content in the simulation that is being done in the game. Someone that is an expert on the facilitation to conduct the games and to make them the best use of the games as possible with the users, with the players. And of course, if it is a game within someone with game design skills, and also if we are dealing with a serious game, usually we want data, we want outcomes of the games to support other processes, usually some political, some policies, implementation, something related to decision making of higher levels, and we want to collect data to support that decision, that it's not in the game board, but it can be in the game also. It depends on the game and on the overall process. So we need data collection and data analysis of the game. So creating here a scheme, we want to implement user-centered design because we are dealing with games, and the players should be our top concern because we are creating something for humans, but we need to take into account this simulation side, this data analysis, the game design, and the game facilitation as something that all contributes to this user-centered design where the player is in the center of the game. So in the participation field, there are some literature that say that we are living a crisis of participation, that citizens and stakeholders wish to participate in planning and decision making, but there's lack of available time, other activities that are more compelling and require citizens' attentions. And this process, this planning process, usually about cities and urban realities, are very long, complex, boring in some cases, and they, in this way, as human societies tend to be very fragmented, and some of the times they generate hate battles between two separate groups that will not enter the process in a collaborative way, so it's difficult to get some real decisions and a common understanding of all the issues at stake. And one of the problems is that some of these participatory process, they do not generate results. So people, when they participate, they think that it was a waste of time. And so planners need new methods to deal with this, to deliver engaging methods for participants to participate in the process and to deal with the complexity of spatial and urban planning, because cities are maybe one of the human most complex creations, because in a big city, everything can happen in the same space at the same time and all in the conflicting way and with many different persons and groups and social dynamics all at the same time. So it's quite complex to create models of these realities and invite the users to this complex process and make them decide about something that will affect their future and all their lives. So, and we also need ways to treat the data from these innovative participatory methods. Usually, if we decide to create these methods to increase the participation, then we need a data analysis and data collection process to make use of them. And this is not easy at all. And why is it participation important? Well, it's ways to introduce innovation, because sometimes when you have the teams of experts that are supporting the policies, they might not know everything, and for sure they do not know everything. And because these are groups that sometimes are close and they have a limited amount of participants, we need new ways to introduce and to include more visions of that complex reality. And we need ways to get information so for planners to use them. And when you use games, usually you can get information that we would not get by other means. Usually when we invite the participants, that usually are the users of a space, of a city, they will provide the planners that are the experts with information that they will not collect. For example, what are the daily challenges of the people living there? What are the backgrounds, their heritage, things that happen in that space, the social dynamics, and this has a lot of value to collect. And it's a way to adapt the solutions, the urban solutions, to the user's needs. And it's not easy to collect and to identify these needs by the standard and traditional methods that usually are surveys and very typified process where it's difficult to include data that it's different and it goes outside these very constrained boxes. And of course, when we are dealing with these new ways of introducing and including the residents and the inhabitants of a city in their decision-making process, we need to create awareness and to discuss the solutions. And some of the times this requires negotiation and the acceptability of the things that are proposed. In some of the cases, they are quite complex and they require really a learning process to understand what's being proposed and what are the impacts of that solutions. So one way to deal with this is collaborative planning, which also always includes a stage of learning about the issue at stake, the other stakeholders and the other participants' claims, and to adapt and to combine these participation methods with technical expert knowledge of specific areas. For example, imagine in the city, you usually need someone that is an expert on emergency systems, an expert on transit and transport systems, experts on the environmental challenges and climate change. So there's a lot of things to consider and to include in these broader plans. So we have several ways to implement these game-based approaches. I've been talking about serious games, but I think it's useful to clarify what are these terms. It's very common to use the term gamification, and gamification is the use of elements of games into non-game activities. And for example, if you consider, for example, any social media, we can say that they are a low level of gamification. For example, a like sharing system, it's a way to incentivize the users to do and to be in the platform. But there's more deeper gamification and narratives and with rewards where you can get other incentives to play and to be in the system. Usually it's connected to be in the system or to spend more money or to buy more products or to be part of a community. So sometimes they are not clearly games, and sometimes they are as games. So it depends, can have several, can be implemented in several ways. But what I will address is this case of serious games or applied games. We can see in the literature a lot of ways to describe this, or games for purposes. In this case, we are dealing with games that are created. So it's game designing applied to other purposes beyond entertainment, but the game should be engaging nonetheless. So it's a mix between simulation and enjoyment of being engaged to do that activity. So it's a mix of the two things, which is not easy to balance in reality. So why games matter for planning? So games provide these playable models. For example, they allow us to test decision making and see the results. So let's see if our decision provides and delivers what we intend to do, and this is quite powerful for citizens. So they allow us to foster participants' agency, so they will be responsible for the things that they decide. So this is quite a game-changing attitude towards the democratic approach. So it's not the participants can play as politicians by themselves. So this can be something that can be problematic in some cases, but this is quite a way to test and to experiment new levels of democratic systems that can change the way democracies happen in reality. So games are opening new doors to go deeper into the democratic development of societies. And this use of games allow us to do collaborative play, which is solving problems in the collaborative way without competition, without distraction, where the competition can be a collaborative way and a collective way to deal with a problem. For example, imagine that your problem is, for example, to deal with climate change, or to deal with the flooding, or to deal with something that is a menace to your social group, your community, your country, your region, whatever. And the game can be defined as this problem that you will together try to solve. So this allows us to create a new way of dealing with problems, which is more collaborative, which leads to something that is, I think it's very important nowadays, that is making the communities more resilient to deal with problems and pacify this notion of constant war between different opinions without trying to understand why the others have different opinions from ours. And this is something that when we develop games to deal with these problems, people are forced to understand why the others want something different from them, and people can, and sometimes they realize that they are not that different at all. But of course, these have some problems, which is games are not easy to create. It can be very difficult to create a game, and very difficult to create a game that is based on a model and that will be useful as a tool to support decision making and to generate the outcomes and the real outcomes and the serious outcomes that we wish. Because usually when we create a game, we tend to oversimplify reality in order to get some playability. So this is something that we that work in serious games are always concerned about this. Are we going too much into the playability or too much into the simulation? And one thing usually is done by affecting the other. And of course, games also provide a lot of data, and sometimes it's not easy to collect this data in a way it's useful for support other processes. And usually serious games are not used by themselves. They are a tool in a broader way to deal with a problem or to deal with a challenge, where the games are a way to collect more information and to generate solutions. But usually we do not address a problem only by using a game. They are part of a broader solution, and sometimes they do not provide us with data, or are not as deeper or as complete as we wish for reality. And making games, it's not easy. We need to have a lot of knowledge, time, and resources. And one way to do this is to use some entertainment games that can fit our goals. And there's some cases where we can adapt some existing games to do some goals that we wish. For example, City Skylines, and there's a second version of this game, the digital way, but there's also the board game. We can make some simulations in the game. It's possible. But when we use analog games, we have some advantages. They have some limitations because they have some limitations to simulate reality, but they have some advantages that are, because they are cheaper to produce and to adapt, and we can adapt the game as the process is ongoing. And I will talk about some cases of this. And in the case of analog games, we have some additional advantages, that is this part of the collaborative play and tangible play, because we know that when we propose games to play in person, face to face, usually the levels of collaboration are higher, because people will try to will be incentivized to be more forgiving and more collaborative, have a higher collaborative approach when dealing with the game, we're teaching the game, we're explaining the game to the other participants and trying to solve them together, because the empathy levels will be higher when you are face to face with a person than when we are just looking at the screen and you don't see all the human reactions of the other players. And this is something very important when we are building these games, to find solutions for communities and for cities and for groups. And Some say we are living in the board game golden age. This is a picture that I took 2 years ago in Essen-Spiel in Germany. And Gen Con in the United States was some days ago. I'm not sure if it's still happening at this moment. So it was quite a success. This is quite a, there are a lot of people that are following this trend of going back to analog, and analog games are becoming better and better each year. So a lot of good solutions, but the real question is, can we use them for planning or for these serious games approaches? And now I'm going to show some case studies where I've used these games and used some of the game design elements to produce other solutions. In this case, this is a paper that is already published. It's published on Simulation in Gaming. It's a quite famous journal about serious games and the use of games and simulation. And it was an experiment of setting a game. The game was played in a theater. It was a session about sustainable transport systems. And they asked me to talk about transport systems. And I thought, well, the best way to do this is to create a game and allow the participants to play the game as they wish. And then we'll talk about sustainability of the transport system. But I will set the game in a way that even the persons that are attending and are not playing can participate in the game. And this generated this idea of non-player participation in game sessions. And this is the session. You can see I'm holding some strings. The strings have some colors, and the colors represent different transport systems that you can combine to address the transport system of the city. So some are bicycle lanes, other are tramways, other are buses, others are trains, others are a highway. So a lot of ways to do this. So in this case, it was 20 minutes. So I used my time not doing an expositive presentation, but doing a game. So I invited the participants that were in the audience watching the event to participate, to come to the stage and play the game. Just needed to get a map in the floor, get some coins, and I created a game economy for this. So I gave the participants some quantity of resources that they could spend together in the collaborative way to define this system. But the game was set in a way that the experts from the municipality and the other speakers were nearby and were incentivized to try to influence the decisions of the players. And also the people in the audience could try to influence their decisions without actually playing the game. So this is a way to deal with the problem of some games, that is this prejudice that games are not serious and we cannot do anything serious with them. And usually adults need to try the games first or see the games happening before participate. In this case, they were participating as they wish. And I've talked about the need to adjust the game in real time. This was the case because I planned the game and we need to set the game economy for the game to work for a specific number of players. I didn't have those numbers, so I need to adjust the game economy in real time in a way for the game to be challenging, meaningful. And it was possible to do in simple games like this one. Another case study is for my city of Leiria. So it's a medieval city. I think it's very beautiful because it's my city and you can visit if you visit Portugal. And in this case, it was a project from the European Commission about creating this city safer. So that was a set of different cities around Europe. And because we have a medieval city center, sometimes we can have some problems of urban security. And this was a project to include the stakeholders, the local stakeholders, in getting ways, in getting solutions to increase the urban security of our city. And the theoretical model here was also a collaborative budget allocation in the co-design process. And for the co-design, the municipality, so I've done this with the local municipality of Leiria, the Leiria city. The game approach was divided into three processes, three phases. The first phase and they all used games. The first phase was imagination and idea generation using games. The second stage was problem and solution location, so dealing with space and trying to locate the ideas in the actual urban space, and then create a collaborative planning solution where they could decide and plan the solution for the city. So this is the framework for this approach. 3 sessions with the purposes of each section, the type of games that I use in each part. So the first part was molding existing games that foster collaboration and creativity and could be a way for the users to express ideas and identify the problems. And then I created a new game to be the model to support the decision making with the allocation of a budget to define these proposals. And you can see the phase 1. In the phase 1, they are the participants, the stakeholders, where you can see participants from the fire department, some of the communities, some experts of different fields that were participating. They were identifying and voting and creating. In the second phase, they are expressing their ideas in maps, so it's more tangible and more related to the space. And the third phase, they are planning and making a plan with solutions and with some data sets of the solutions. And you can see some of the stakeholders, some citizens, and the project was so interesting that the real mayor and the councillors played the game, because the game had a narrative where you played as the councillors and then the real councillors played as themselves, as a process of reflecting on their own activities and their own decisions. So you can see some images. So I used here the are Dixit cards. It was part of the storytelling to generate ideas in the first games. And you see here some drawing games for the second stage, second phase, where they expressed ideas and try to understand the specific dimensions of the space. And you can see here also the goals, and the goals were to create this awareness that there will not be resources to do all the possible solutions, so they will need to manage their resources, and they could interact with each other to use the money that each one of them got to create broader proposals and more impactful proposals that will need and require them to agree on the things to do. So this was part of the game. You can see that it's a collaborative approach, and the game mechanics was resource allocation and interactive tables where all the resources and all the impacts will be recorded automatically as they interacted with the game. And you can see here the theoretical model where there's this notion of the game economy supporting this game interactivity, where they decide and use the pieces that are placed into tables. They represent things that they previously defined in the stage 1 and stage 2 as solutions to be placed in the space, and now they should manage the resources, the economy, the game monetary units of the thing that they were deciding to put. And of course, this required modulation of how to define how much each thing costed. So it was quite a long process to get this final solution. And you can see them playing the third level of the game, where they are identifying first problems and then making solutions and making networks of solutions, and see the results and impacts in this model, which is the real model of the city. And this was so successfully that we played this with different stakeholders, with the elected officials, with the councillors, and with the chief of staff of the different departments of the city. And you can see, for example, here is a solution where you can see the places to improve the municipal parks, to improve the infrastructures, to increase the police surveillance, to renew the urban buildings that were becoming damaged, You can see new places for the public transportation. You can see new places to increase the public lighting. So there's a lot, the public illumination. And when we have these analog outcomes, we can then pass these solutions to digital tools and make analysis of the solutions and compare the results from the different groups to see if there is some patterns. And now you can see, when we identify those patterns, we see that some of the solutions are something that almost all the participants agree. So we should use those solutions, and it's quite important for the elected officials and the politicians to know this solution, so they will know that the community really wants those solutions. And it was so impactful that children also play the games. It's a game modification of this same game system, where you focus on the urban surroundings of their school. So it's a reality that they know. So increasing the urban security around their school in the simplified version of the game. Another case study, it's a case study where it was the planning of the municipal network of schools. And this case, it was to compare if we could compare the game-based results, so the results of the game, with some established planning decision-making process. In this case, efficiency models that I will explain. In this case, it was also a real case scenario of a new municipality in Portugal, a smaller one, but that has some very diverse type of land uses, which created a very curious case. And the model here was facility location problem, where I used the optimization model with the software to calculate what was the best solution to place schools in this region, so that all the students would have access to a school that was closer to their home, and that will generate the most cost, the least cost for the municipality. So something that will deal with the needs for the students, and that will cost less for the municipality. So the game was developed in the software, so we needed to define a model for this. This is the model. I will not go into details. The model was solved into a software that created a solution, and you can see here the model being solved and the game being developed in a parallel way as the model. So when I have the solution, then I mimic the way the software operated in a way that players could play it as a game. So, and this was my first play test. This is to show that usually when we have an idea for a game, we need to play test it and to see if it works. So I decided to play test this with the small village, with a small town of this municipality. And it worked, but it was very complex and very long. So this would be totally unfit for a session that we didn't wish to be more than 1 hour for something to plan this network. So this was very accurate as a way to simulate what the decision-making process is, but it was not fit for stakeholders and for users to play this in a realistic way. So this would took more than a day just to play all this model. So I had to find another solution. So I find another way to solve this. So without counting each student, I grouped the students in groups of 5, and the model was quite similar to the model of the optimization software, and it was quite less. It was less complex to calculate. It took less time, but it was the accuracy in the solution was the same. So I created this new model where the users will play with all the different with all the region, and you can see that the spatial units are modeled like hexagons, like we do in a regular word game. So they were trying to deal with this problem that was making sure that all the students were allocated to a school. And you can see the tables on the right. They represent the various schools that can be placed in the space, and these tables on the right are the capacities of these facilities. And you can see that the chips are placed in the map. So this represents the quantity of students that live in each space. And when you allocate them to schools, you could count the transport distance, and we got the costs for the transport systems, the transport distances that they need to travel to go to the schools, and the cost of opening and closing the schools. And this is like a player guide like a player aid to teach the players what to do. The game is quite simple, just need to move pieces around and track the costs of the thing that you are deciding. But either way, we were aiming this game for players without any type of experience with games. So it needed to be quite simple. And you can see some testing sessions, and you can see that these are some colleagues from the university that in the left that helped to playtest the game. And you can see the final users, they are the counselors of this city that are playing the game and discussing the solutions. You can see here the solution. When the game is done, you can see that there are a pattern of schools that are defined into the region. So this is a final solution that covers all the needs of our problem. And this is the same solution as the optimizer, so we can compare if the groups that play the game were near the optimal solution or not. And we collected a lot of data about this, about the experience of the players, to understand if players thought that this was a meaningful activity or not, if this simulate the decision makings and the problem at stake. But what was more curious to see was that the participants that ignored the specific dimensions of that space, that territory, that played the game as a mathematical problem, were the ones that were closer to the optimizer. But the ones that played knowing what was the social reality of that space didn't get as close to the optimal solution, because they considered other dimensions that the game as a mathematical model did not consider. That was, for example, that in some small towns and some small villages, it will have a lot of impacts to close the only existing school and make people travel to other villages. And this is something that the model did not account, but it was a very important outcome of the game, because in this decision-making planning process, we wish to collect these impacts of our decisions, and the elected politicians were very concerned about this, about simply do not choose what was the optimal solution from an economic perspective, but taking into account the other impacts, social impacts, environmental impacts of the things that they were deciding. So the game proved to clarify and help to quantify these dimensions. And this is something like a method to replicate this model, where we define the process, we have an optimizer or another tool to get the optimal solution, and then we create our model. And our model, when players play them, the farther they are from the optimal solution, it's a way to take into account what were the other costs that our model did not consider when we define them in the first stage. So sometimes it's difficult to model everything. When we do this, we allow the users to highlight what are other dimensions they will like to consider, and then we can see the results of this, the economic results. Another case study, it's something that it's happening at the moment. It's a way to understand the transport flows in this region, and the game is set as 2 stages. The first stage is to self-presentation exercise, at least 3 stages, and the second stage is to understand how different scales connect to the thing that we want to address. In this case, it's the type of transport and travels to go to a school. So it's a connection of the school to their surroundings, but to the entire region, considering here multiple scales, which is something that is quite difficult for non-experts to consider. And the third game, it's also a budget allocation game. And you can see here some examples. You can see that there are two maps, so they are two different games. In the first game, there's a model to classify these travels, and it typifies the travels per type, if they are travels for work, travels for leisure, travels to school. And then when they define these models, so they understand the connections from this smaller scale to the bigger scale, to the regional scale, they can have their decisions in a smaller scale. And this is the way this game is being done. And I hope to have more data when this is finished. Another case is the ones that I'm doing in Ireland with our group in the project Craftmate Street, where we are creating games for teachers and for local authorities to deal with climate change. In this case, I'm doing several analog games, and there's an approach of dividing the games into three different approaches, where the first game, it's like a ice-breaking exercise to introduce some of the concepts. In this case, we are dealing with natural-based solutions to deal with climate change. So the first game, it's a real-time game where players are introducing to these concepts, just breaking the ice, to prepare for a second game where they have a more detailed model and where they are dealing with flooding with a coastal region. And this way they need to plan together how to deal with this, to move the populations, to make defenses or not against the flooding. And this is prepared from the previous game where they introduced the concepts and now they apply them. And the third game, it's a game where we simulate the complexity of collaborative and real decision making, where the stakeholders have different claims and different agendas. And this is a semi-cooperative game where each of the players have different goals, and some of them overlap with other players and some do not. So they need to negotiate what are the things to do. And in this game, it's done in real time to simulate that in reality, when we try to make these decisions and these semi-collaborative decisions, we are doing them in real time. And we don't have all the time to discuss everything. So we need to focus on what is more important. Case study 6, it's like something more personal. The teacher at this school where my daughter was at that time asked me to do something for the children about sustainability. And I created a game where they will reflect how the travels from the children to get to the school would happen. And it's quite unsustainable in this case because they all use private cars, and there's in the rush hour, it's impossible to travel here and to get the kids to the school without parking in inappropriate places. So it's a way to deal with this. So the first part of the game was asking the students, and of course there's a game model, a system to define a simplified model of the school. I defined the quantity of pieces for them to use, and asked the students to model their school. And then with the Tetris model, polynomials, I asked them to fill all the spaces with cars, and of course there were more cars than space available, and then asked them to replace the cars with sustainable transport systems that will clear some space, and then they could decide what to do with this space, creating here an ideation and a design thinking process, because it opened new possibilities to include more things that they wish to include in their school. And this way we address sustainability, because children will think about the transport system, the impact in the region, and how they could use this space in new ways. And you see that they propose some more parks, more green spaces, and it was quite interesting. The other thing that I'm doing at the moment is for captures. It's a case study. It's a game that will be presented in the annual conference of emergency managers in Colorado Springs in November. It's a game about dealing with a catastrophe in the region where emergency managers manage their resources to predict events and contain the cascading effects of this bigger event that will have a lot of impacts. The solution is 2 tabletop games. A first game, which is a simplification to understand how to play the games and to understand the game mechanics, and then prepare the players to go into the deeper one, where they will be playing in real time, and they will be introducing to a scenario where they need to deal with this event, and they will need to allocate their resources in a fast experience. And this way, it's also a way to train and to test this approach of creating several games that are in reality one game, that are connected to reduce the complexity and to help the participants to play the game in a more easy way and to focus on the scenario and the serious goal and the serious simulation that we wish, without the gaming side to affect their decisions. That is what we want. This is the first play session, the prototype that was play tested in my city, in Leiria, with the emergency managers. So this is the early prototype. The game will look a lot different when we will use them in the conference in November, but the game proved to simulate this specific scenario that I will not say what it is, because it's like a surprise. But the game is looking good, and we are now dealing with the graphical design and improving the UI UX of the game, but the game is proving to work. So some conclusions to wrap up and to finalize this, to go into the questions. I think we can conclude that analog games can replicate decision-making for spatial models, and they can be used with different publics and bring citizens closer to experts. That modern board game elements, because all these games that are presented, they use some of the game elements and mechanics and physical components that usually modern board games are using for games for entertainment, and we can use these things also for serious games and to simulate our playable scenarios. And one of the biggest outcomes that we also can get with these games, of course, the games by themselves, by their scores and the way players play the components, they provide a lot of data, but a very important outcome is the discussions and the awareness that these games provide. And some of this, in most of the cases, I recommend that we have some ways to collect this data, filming, audio recording, anything we can collect this, because this will provide a lot of information and data for the use of these games as planning support tools. Because if the process itself it's not to define the solution, for sure this will be useful for those that are responsible to make the decisions and to find the solution when they have all these other outcomes and all these visions and solutions to support their final one. So, and we seen that the participants can be engaged through these games, and they would experiment collaborative planning process, collaborative approaches based on games, and this will increase their ability to solve together more in future problems that they will encounter as a community. And this serve as a way to make people together and more empathic towards the challenges of the future. And this also allows us, when we use models that are based in simulation and optimization results, that we can use sophisticated tools to generate our outcomes. You can compare how real users will deal with similar models and how far or closer they are to them, and what's the value of other things that are not represented in the models, because the models are always imperfect. They cannot predict and simulate everything. And when we try to do them, they might be very heavy to be managed. We can make simpler models and let the users reveal the other dimensions that we did not simulate. And of course, as I talked, it's very important to collect the data. And we are always trying to develop new ways to treat and to collect and to present the data from games, but it's not easy to do this in reality, because games are emergent systems where a lot of uncertain things happens, and we in the research community, in the game research community, are always trying to find new ways to collect this data and to improve these frameworks for designing the games as playable models, and also to collect and treat the data and use the data to reinforce and to guarantee that we achieve the goals that we define for our game, the series goals that we define before designing the game. And I've also talked about these limitations. Games take time to develop. There's always the balancing problem between simulation and playability. The simplification can jeopardize the simulation, and the game models that focus on core objectives of the series games can lose their engagement side. And the skills of the game facilitators are quite important, and this scarcity of frameworks to develop, facilitate, and collect the game-based process are an ongoing problem that we are always trying to solve. And of course, there's a prejudice about games, that games are for children, a waste of time and resources, and that are unable to deliver useful and practical data. And sometimes we need to design our games to deal with this prejudice and to show people that games can be very powerful and can be very serious tools. So I thank you for your attention. Sorry for my English. I tried my best to be as clear as possible, and you can see my contact, and you can visit my website if you wish to see some of these case studies, more projects, the research that I've been publishing, the papers, the conferences, papers, and all the other ongoing projects. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Wonderful presentation. I'm sorry, this is not Sebastian. I'm tagging in for him since he had to step away for a sec. But we're going to just go through a few of the questions here in the comments and see if you can provide some insight. We have one from Priyank who asks, what should the approach to convince public officials to adopt serious games as part of their decision-making be? You mentioned there's some of the challenges like the perception that it's for children or a waste of time. How can we convince public officials to adopt them?
It's not easy. In my experience, I was able to convince some of them by finding ways for them to try them. This is why, for example, when they ask me for to be a speaker in conferences or stuff like that, I try to create at least some small games and some small dynamics for them to participate by themselves, and then they see the impacts. And showing case studies, I think it's quite important to show the case studies and show the results. But it's always difficult, and in some cases, I do not call these processes games. I avoid the term games. I just say that we are doing a process that is interactive, and when they are playing and when they are dealing with it and seeing it, I say, well, this is something we do. It's like a game, for example, and I use quite a lot the military example, because wargaming, I think it might be the oldest systematic use of games, and I usually say, well, if the military use them, they should be serious, because they are dealing with very serious issues. So we can use them also for other applications. So it's like a combination of these 3 or 4 approaches that I've talked about.
Thank you for the response. We have a question from Anya who asks if you have any good serious games that you would recommend for art students, particularly fine arts, people who design art and design for public spaces, anything along those lines.
Usually, I do not recommend serious games in particular, a specific serious game, because I believe that for a purpose, we need to define the game specifically for it. So I will recommend that the people that are using the game or the team should have experts in game design and in the content that is addressed or the issue at stake. I usually do not recommend a specific game for a specific thing. So this is not like something you can go into a store and buy a generic product. I always recommend that if you are using a product, you should at least adapt it for the purpose. And this is why we always start from the purpose. What do we want to achieve with the game? Very specific, and then use it. But there's other ways we can do this. If we want something generic, for example, imagine that you frame the goal by something generic as skills. You want a game to train a specific skill like communication or team building or whatever you want. And then you can use some at least adapted game and follow a framework. It's easier that way. But usually in my classes, because I do several classes and workshops, when sometimes I teach teachers how to use games, I always focus on the generic side of the games and show them a lot of games and game mechanics and game dynamics and game examples for them to be able to use by themselves and combine as they wish to the goal. So I tend not to recommend like a specific game for a specific problem.
That totally makes sense. We have a question from Shimon who asks, particularly with regards to your slide that's about how games take time to develop. How much time did you put into each case study? And kind of, can you give a sense of what your kind
Yeah,
of the timeline and your workload for developing one of these case studies and games is?
it depends. And I think when you got experience with it, this is why I think that the first thing we should do to enter this world is be a player. So you need to have gaming culture. So you need to play a lot of things to be aware of what is there out there. And then starting to adapt the games. And this will, and read literature and educate yourself and try to go into classes. And analog games is a better way to do this because we can adapt them more easily and adapt them to the purpose. And when we do that, it becomes easier to develop these game approaches. For example, some of them took me 1 day to develop. Others took me 1 year. For example, that one about the network of schools, it took me a lot of time because I needed to create the mathematical model and test it first, and then create all the game around it to be sure that they will deliver the same result in the two media. For example, the other game about that school that was more like a sandbox game about allowing the students to materialize their ideas, it took me 1 day to develop. So it depends on the type of game and our experience. So it can vary a lot. And of course, it will help a lot. I think you can see in the picture. I'm in I call it my game lab, personal game lab. I have all this structured in a way that I have specific game pieces, specific boards of each type that I can reuse over and over again to build any type of game solution that I wish.
Awesome. And we have a question from Jan, who asks, do you have a pool of mechanics to integrate specific models, or do you build from the bottom up depending on the requirements? So that's a little bit of a spin on that on that last question, but if you could elaborate on that point.
Yeah. I I've worked on that in my PhD thesis. The thesis is available online. You can see it in my website or in the university where I've done it, in the University of Coimbra in Portugal. It's in English, so you can see it. One of the chapters that hopefully I will publish or not, it depends if I have time and if it has the quality to be published or not. It depends. It's a collection of mechanics to simulate spatial realities. But what I would recommend is that we need to know a lot about game mechanics. So I recommend literature about this. And when you have literature and when you play games, you start to form patterns. But one difficulty about this is that and I have a paper published about this, it's very difficult to define what a game mechanic is. Is it mechanic? Is it mechanism? Are they different? What they are different in digital platforms and in analog platforms. Sometimes author is talking about a game mechanic, but it's talking about a very different thing. So we need to build this knowledge by ourselves based on the experience, because sometimes we might not be talking about the same things. So what I recommend is to play a lot of games, to read the main literature about this, and start to analyze each game and to identify these patterns. Because after we start to play a lot of games of similar types, we start to see some emerging patterns, and then we can use those patterns to create our own games.
Thank you for the thoughtful answer. I think we just have one last question from RVA, who was asking if he could cite you in some of your materials, but I think it might be easiest if you just can share your contact info so people can reach out about that sort of stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
How they can get in contact with you and how we can find your materials.
I'll put my website link here. It's all there. And there's my contact. There's the literature that I've been published and some examples of the case studies. So it's quite easy to get in touch with me, even online, because I'm quite available and the information is available. Just need to search for my name and things will pop up.
Awesome. And I think that is our last question. And with that, everyone join me in saying thank you to our speaker and